Hello, it's Wednesday the 7th of March. I am Malcolm Massey and this is the UK Column News. Last week, on Friday the 2nd of March at the Royal Courts in London, with over 200 people crowded on the street outside, an extraordinary case took place which now sets a dangerous precedent for families with vulnerable children and adults. All those present were visibly shocked, not just at the result of the case, but also in the manner in which it was conducted. Their opinion was a biased and rigged trial designed to protect the establishment. The appeal hearing concerned the Aberdeen's Down syndrome woman Holly Gregg, who has been striving for truth and justice following her exposure of sexual abuse as a child at the hands of a gang operating to the highest levels of the Scottish establishment. To date, the Scottish legal and political system has spent millions trying to silence Holly and her mother Anne, as well as investigative reporter Robert Green, who has been helping the family over several years. In the packed London courtroom, where members of the public were forced to stand and others to sit on the floor, 3 High Court judges failed to uphold a challenge to an earlier ruling where the judge, with no personal medical or psychological expertise, and with no such expertise in her court, was able to rule that Holly was not competent. Taken together, these hearings regarding Holly mean that a single, unqualified judge can now rule that an individual is not mentally and intellectually competent. For Holly, originally described as a capable, reliable and truthful witness by Grampian police, the Royal Court's judgment has undermined her testimony of sexual abuse at a single stroke. For other Down syndrome children and their parents, it means that the state can intervene with no evidence at any time. Those present in the Friday hearing were particularly shocked to witness the 3 High Court judges retiring for just 5 minutes to deliberate, before returning to deliver a 40-minute judgment. A rigged hearing on the back of a pre-decided judgment was the overwhelming opinion of the general public witnessing events. Despite massive publicity to alert the BBC and other mainstream media and newspapers to the hearing on Friday, no single reporter attended. Sky News camera team, present for the hearing with footballer Ryan Giggs, also taking place at the courts, refused to take reports or film the demonstration. The UK column considers that once again the Royal Courts of Injustice have lived up to their name. Meanwhile, the battle to expose paedophiles within both the English and Scottish political and legal establishment continues. The government continues to take steps towards privatising Great Britain this week, with its announcement that police authorities are to allow private firms to provide a much wider range of services for local constabularies than has hitherto been the case. This move should set alarm bells ringing, as this is part of a wider government plan to privatise every aspect of our nation. On the 22nd of December of 2011, it was reported that Lincolnshire Police had agreed a contract with G4S worth £200 million over 10 years. They claim this will save them £28 million over the life of the contract. However, in 2010 they reported they were required to save £20 million within 4 years. G4S will be responsible for the operation of the Forces Control Centre, human resources, training, finance and custody. G4S is not the only private company to contract to UK police forces. Cleveland Police Authority has extended its outsourcing deal with business services provider Steria, moving a number of operations into its shared services centre in Stockton. Constabularies in Somerset and Devon are also known to have partnerships with South West One and IBM. The initial deal between Cleveland Police and Steria, announced in June 2010, was said to be worth £175 million over 10 years. However, despite the contract being funded by the taxpayer, the final terms of the contract are unknown, hidden behind commercial confidentiality. Jack Dromey, MP for Birmingham Erdington, said, "Government are now driving Britain's police service down the path of privatisation, with virtually nothing ruled out by ministers at this stage." The Police Federation warned that it was an extremely dangerous road to take. Government would have us believe that this is all relatively straightforward when considering the merits of privatisation in regards to fiscal policy. But no one seems to be questioning government as to why they are not investing these large amounts of money into more competitive technologies and much greater levels of training within the public sector that already exists. But there is another glaringly obvious element to this that the media seems to be missing. Private companies are private. The public has absolutely no say in how they are run, who they are run by, how the profits will be spent, misspent, or filtered into tax havens. Private companies are exempt from the Freedom of Information Act. Chief executives do not take an oath of office. There is no accountability. Chief executives do not have to cap their earnings like ministers do, and they can spend their money wherever, with whomever, whichever way they want. Companies exist simply to make a profit. G4S, for example, announced that its turnover in 2010 was £7.4 billion, with a pre-tax profit of £530 million. That's £530 million of our money that is going to line the pockets of the wealthy instead of being ploughed back into public services. To imply that this blurring of the public-private line is to save you money appears to be fraudulent. This is a great example of the government's problem, reaction, solution engine running full steam ahead to destroy the foundations of our nation. A scenario has been orchestrated whereby funding cuts cause a poor service. The public reaction to this problem demands something be done, which enables the government to put forward the solution: privatisation, resulting in the asset stripping of the nation. Andrew Lansley, the Secretary of State for Health, got an unpleasant reception yesterday when he visited a hospital in Hampstead. To say he came face to face with protesters campaigning against government reforms of the health service is not entirely true, as the MP tried his best to avoid the groups of people outside by sneaking in through the back door and skulking quietly through the corridors along with his police escort. His covert visit came undone when he was confronted by a furious GP leader, Dr. Ron Singer, who branded the new reform bill as rubbish. Dr. Singer, who has been a doctor for 30 years, wanted the MP to explain to him exactly how the proposed bill would help patients, because, according to Dr. Singer, and echoed by many others, no one understands your bill. Perhaps, but the motives are certainly clear. It is simply another bill introduced to privatise our services, thus removing ownership from us to the private sector. It is daylight robbery. These sentiments are echoed by protester June Hortop, who hit out at Mr. Lansley stating, "I've had enough of you and Cameron. You've been privatising since 1979, don't dare lie to me." The UK healthcare system is the last bastion of our public sector, upheld by many to be one of the best healthcare systems in the world, but, like all public services, it has not been immune to heavy cuts in public money, which has affected its capability. This weakening of the service has created a hole for Cameron's private bullies to filter through, which has seen more and more NHS services outsourced to private hospitals, and hospitals such as Hinchingbrooke Hospital in Cambridgeshire being turned over completely to the private sector. Though the government will declare that many hospitals are operating at a loss, what they will fail to mention is that many were encouraged to use PFI loans to build new hospitals. These loans most often carry a crippling interest payment scheme, often locking hospitals into a long-term debt that they are unlikely to pay back, paving the way for the full privatisation of our health service. After a short lull in the British-led drive for World War III, David Cameron restarted the anti-Iran rhetoric yesterday in comments to MPs. In a chilling echo of Tony Blair's build-up to war with Iraq, Cameron lied that Iran is not only developing a nuclear weapons capability, but that it is also developing an intercontinental ballistics missile capable of dropping a warhead on London. "I don't believe that an Iranian nuclear weapon is just a threat to Israel," Cameron lied. Cameron's comments to MPs followed a briefing on Iran given to Cabinet by MI6 Chief Sir John Sawyers and the National Security Advisor Sir Kim Darroch. No doubt this briefing was of the same quality MI6's Yellow Cake briefing that Mr. Blair used to convince his cabinet to attack Iraq, with the exception of Robert Cook. Meanwhile, in the United States, Israel's Prime Minister, Bibi Netanyahu, visited Cameron's puppet, Obama, this week. Obama looked distinctly glum during the public portion of their meeting. This is understandable, because while Obama is under orders from David Cameron to back Israel up as it plans its insane attack on Iran, he is under massive pressure from his own generals not to get involved. He also has an election coming up, which at this point in time he is doubtful to win. Taking the United States into a war with Iran before November's election would almost certainly guarantee his ouster. The question for us here in Britain is, why has Cameron reignited the anti-Iran rhetoric in this way? Iran is only an interim target. The real target is Russia and NATO's European missile shield, which is being deployed right around Russia's borders. It's being justified as a defence against Iranian intercontinental nuclear weapons. Another reason President Obama may have been looking glum during his meeting with Netanyahu last Monday was an article in Haaretz, detailing Netanyahu's plan to drag the United States into an attack on Iran. The Haaretz article states that
those Israeli planners who believe in an attack have one hope only, that the United States will be dragged in and complete the Israeli move. The Israeli operation is meant to be a hydrogen bomb, with the Israeli strike on Iran's nuclear facilities serving as the detonator. If numerous missiles land on Tel Aviv and American assets in the region are hit, the carefully chosen timing right before the US elections is supposed to compel Obama to send the only military force capable of destroying Iran's nuclear program. Sometime between early June and mid-August, just before the Republican nominating convention, will be the ideal moment to drag the United States into war, the planners believe. Faced with this gamble, even former National Security Advisor Uzi Arad, the man who once gave the most extremist interview ever on the nuclear issue, is now showing himself to be a comparative moderate. Even Arad assists on the coordination with the United States, and thus found himself to the left of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on the question of whether to attack. That, in his view, is why he was ousted. Netanyahu didn't want position papers offering other options. The current plan is meant to spark Iranian attack on American targets that will drag America into the war. The goal of the Israeli maneuvering is simple: to generate American chatter that will prepare the ground for dragging the United States into the battle following the Israeli strike. That's all.
the article points out that this would be a wild gamble and should be considered an order that is patently illegal and an order that must not be obeyed, not this summer and not in Israel. Economics news now. The cost of borrowing is at an all-time high as banks try to stay afloat in the face of their own bankruptcy. The Bank of England has held the base rate at 0.5% since March 2009 in an attempt to ease the pressure on the cash-strapped banks as they struggle to cope with maturing debts and the repercussions of payment protection insurance mis-selling. But banks have been steadily increasing the interest rates they charge on all their retail products. The interest charge on overdrafts is now over 40 times the base rate and the highest since records began. The general reaction in the wider media has been one of outrage. A typical comment came from Mark Gander, founder of the Consumer Action Group, who said, "If consumers think that banks are suffering alongside them in this economic crisis, they really do not understand what is going on." The outrage expressed in the media is in fact a diversion. While the public are shouting, "Greedy banks," they are not noticing that the banks are still bankrupt, with massive debt obligations, most of which are held off balance sheet. Nothing has changed. The banks still need to be placed in administration just like any other failed business. All this outrage simply serves to extend is the argument and prevent any real action. For if there were to be any real action on this issue, the hyperinflationary bailouts would stop and the bonuses would stop. A new report commissioned by the far-right Dutch Freedom Party has concluded that it will cost €2.4 trillion to hold the monetary union together over the next 4 years. The report, written by Lombard Street Research, states that it would cost €1.3 trillion to shore up Greece and Portugal alone, and forecasts that in fact Greece will leave the euro following the French presidential elections and that Portugal will also follow. The bailout figures reported by Lombard Street Research are being echoed by the International Institute of Finance, the lobby for the biggest international banks. The IIF is circulating a document estimating an immediate €1 trillion minimum cost if there is a disorderly Greek default, and points out the risk to the European Central Bank, which holds Greek bonds to double the value of its core capital. The main purpose of the IIF document is to put some fear into private sector Greek creditors who have still not accepted the 75% haircut on their bonds, which is supposed to be a key requirement for the recent Greek bailout. The indications are that the haircut deal is not working, and some kind of blowout is on its way. The deadline for acceptance is tomorrow, the 8th of March. In last November's issue of the UK Column newspaper, we reported that Montgomery County Sheriff's Office near Houston, Texas, had taken delivery of a Shadow Hawk drone, manufactured by Vanguard Defense Industries. The drone cost $200,000 and was paid for with federal Homeland Security money. What was significant was that this drone is weaponizable, with what were described as less lethal weapons for law enforcement, such as taxers and stun batons. Well, sadly on the 2nd of March, Montgomery sheriffs admitted that they have crashed their shiny new drone into one of the department's shiny SWAT team tanks during a recent exercise. Vanguard's Defence's CEO Michael Busher said, "The beauty of having something unmanned is you're not putting any humans in harm's way. Unless, of course, you're on the ground." And finally, we'd like to offer our congratulations to Vladimir Putin for winning the Russian presidency. We feel the need to do so since he didn't receive any congratulations from the British, EU or American political leaders whose hearts sank as they realised that the last roadblock to their new world order will be around for a few years more. I'm Malcolm Massey, and this has been the UK Column News. Thank you for watching.